In the fall of 1977, one man spotted something while hunting in the Midwest that shook him to his core. It wasn't that he didn't recognize it, he had seen similar things like it before, but that had only been in the movies. What he saw that day wasn't a movie. It was real, and it absolutely terrified him. Now, later on, he finally felt comfortable enough to share his experience. And that's when he learned that he was only one of thousands of people all around the world who've seen something similar. A shape moving beyond the trees, half in our reality and half beyond the visual spectrum, lying in wait to claim its next victim. You won't want to miss this one. In November of 1977, a man who preferred to remain anonymous, whom we'll call Ted, had picked the perfect place to hunt just to the west of Oscoda. Locals called it the Old Gunnery Range, but in reality, it was an old United States Air Force training area near Old Bissonnet Road and M65. After it was decommissioned, the gunnery range quickly repopulated with local wildlife, making it a favorite for local hunters. The community of Oscoda, Michigan, sits close to Saginaw Bay. Here, along the shores of Lake Huron, thousands of untouched acres of land support a diverse array of wildlife. And it seems something else, something that is only supposed to exist in the movies. Well, on this particular day, Ned set out with his cousins with everything he needed. He parked his car and headed alone into the forest, searching for the perfect hunting spot while his cousins set up elsewhere. And they all agreed to meet back up on the road a little later. And after searching for a little while, Ned found an irresistible spot to set up. It was this cluster of jack pines that not only gave him some cover to hide himself, but was also strategically located near a deer trail. It would be the perfect place to lie in wait for an ambush. The only question was, who would be ambushing who? And so Ned settles in, and he's just listening to the sounds of the outdoors and enjoying the fiery colors of the leaves as they tumble down around him. But above all else, he's keeping his eyes and ears wide open because he doesn't want to go home empty-handed. Now, not a lot happens for a while, and Ned is wondering why he hasn't seen any deer. He knows they walk right by here, but it's been so quiet. He's starting to second-guess himself. And at this point, it's around 2 in the afternoon when he hears something that makes his ears perk up. Something big is moving around behind him. It has to be a deer. So as slowly and as smoothly as he can, he sits up and gently looks over his shoulder. But as he looks, he notices something. The noise sounded like it came from right behind him, but it somehow manages to stay just beyond his line of sight as he cranes his neck in its direction. So he looks over his other shoulder and he's stumped now because this sound ends up doing the exact same thing. In fact, if he didn't know any better, he'd say that the deer somehow knows exactly where he's looking, and it's managing to stay just out of sight. Now, the best Ned can do is just shrug. Maybe if he's patient, the deer will wander into his field of vision. I mean, after all, it doesn't sound like it's going anywhere. And so for the next half an hour, Ned is surrounded by the unmistakable noise of something very heavy walking through the brush just out of sight. Now later, in a conversation with the late author and researcher Linda Godfrey, Ned said that he soon started to realize that whatever this thing was, it didn't seem to be a deer. It was just too big. He ran through the possibilities in his head. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe it was another hunter foolishly tromping around the woods without wearing any orange safety gear. He also thought it might be one of his cousins following him out there to play a prank on him. Then, Ned thought of something even worse. Maybe it was a mountain lion. He'd heard stories of other hunters running into them over the years. The thought made his blood run cold. And by now, Ned had thoroughly spooked himself. To heck with getting a deer. There were other spots in the woods where he could make that happen. For now, he just wanted to relocate as quickly as possible and hoped that whatever it was wouldn't follow him. So Ned gathered all of his gear and started hiking down the road. And that was when he noticed it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps following behind him. Ned stopped. The footsteps stopped. He turned around, but he couldn't see anything. And so he just announced to the empty forest, look, if this is a joke, it's not funny. I am armed to the teeth and I'm a marksman. Ned wasn't lying. At the time, he worked in law enforcement and told Linda that he had a great record with firearms, shooting 600 on the combat course at work. Simply put, he wasn't the kind of person you want to play pranks on in the woods. Hoping this warning had been heard, Ned turned back around and kept tromping back down the road. Within just a few steps, the sound of someone following him returned, clear as day. Now, Ned's not messing around. He thinks that if this person or animal wants to play games with him, he'll play right back. So he decides he's going to flank them. Instead of following the road, he takes a right at the bend in a dense thicket. Once inside, he pulls off his orange hat and vest and covers them up with some dead leaves scattered across the ground. And then he waits. Everything falls dead silent. No squirrels rustling through the underbrush, no birds singing. There's nothing. But Ned knows he's not alone. I mean, he could feel himself being watched. So he watches back, and as he looks up between the trees, Ned stares so hard that he almost feels himself going cross-eyed. He's just scouring every inch of the terrain, looking for any sign of movement that might give away the whereabouts of whatever is following him. But he's starting to think that his eyes are playing tricks on him. Now, there's a portion of the woods, maybe 50 yards or so away, that isn't moving quite right. He blinks, trying to regain his bearings, but when he looks back, it's still there. Keeping an eye on that same spot, Ned raises his .30-06 rifle and looks through the scope, and now, with the benefit of a closer look, he's sure he sees something. But he can't believe his eyes. Ned explained this.
What happened next seemed like an eternity, but only 20 to 30 seconds really elapsed. It was like the forest opened up. The shape was tall, not wide. It really did not show arms or legs. It looked like a hole in the woods. It kind of absorbed all color and light, yet at the same time was not a shadow. It was like something out of the Predator movie. I could see a form, large, at least 7 feet tall, but it was translucent. It stopped and was facing my direction.
Just to be clear, Predator didn't come out until 10 years after Ned's sighting. But he said that when he watched the movie, it gave him flashbacks to what he had seen in those woods near Oscoda. Well, being both a good hunter and a police officer, Ned wasn't about to open fire on something unless he was either 100% sure what it was or he felt in immediate danger. Since none of those situations described the position he found himself in, Ned reached down and felt around until his hand hit a rock. He checked the weight, drew back his arm, and hurled it in the direction of the shape to see what it would do. This semi-transparent figure moved slightly, clearly reacting as the rock landed just a few feet from it. Now, whether it saw the rock or heard it didn't make any difference. It wasn't a figment of his imagination, it was there. And now, Ned realizes that whatever this thing is, it shouldn't exist. And if it shouldn't exist, he has no clue what it's capable of. So he decides that yes, this does constitute a life or death situation, and he opened fires. Ned squeezes the trigger in rapid succession, sending 5 rounds square into the center of mass. Remember, Ned is an expert marksman. He is certain that at least one of his shots found its mark. But the half-invisible figure barely reacts at all. All it does is move slightly as if it's surprised. Surprised, but not at all in fear of its life. Ned, on the other hand, is. So he drops his rifle immediately, unholsters his .357 Magnum without hesitation. He sights down the barrel and unloads 3 6-round speed loaders. Note to self,
don't mess with Ted.
Ned said that no one on Earth could tell me I missed. But even in spite of how sure he was, Ned could see that the figure hadn't budged. It was still there watching from the trees. And then, Ned decides that if none of that took this thing down, he truly has no idea what it's capable of. so Ned abandons his rifle and starts heading downhill, half tumbling, half running, until he reaches the road. Now, luckily, his cousins had heard the gunfire and were already on their way to his location in their ATVs. Ned kneels down and vomits because of how hard he was running and how much the figure had frightened him. Seeing how serious their hunting buddy is, Ned's cousins follow him back uphill in the ATVs to the spot where he abandoned his rifle. There, they find a patch of trees and branches bent back, stretching at least 300 yards into the woods. Ned wasn't lying. Something had been there. When asked what it was, Ned told Linda Godfrey this.
It ain't no bear or man or Bigfoot. It's something else indeed. It was like those badges that show two different things if you look at them from different angles. One angle was forest, the other was this hole. The only noise it made was when it walked, kind of soft rustling footfalls. Even when I shot it, it made no noise. It had no smell or odor.
Ned is just one of thousands of people who have interacted with this entity. Some folks link it to Bigfoot, while others say that it represents secret government technology. But no matter the source, everyone tends to describe it in a similar way, and some even call it by the same name, Glimmer Man. But there seems to be no reason to doubt his testimony. Between being a police officer and having enough honesty to admit how badly it scared him, it seems as if he did barely escape with his life that day in November. Exactly what Ned saw in those woods in Michigan back in 1977 remains unknown. In 2014, Greg was living in Dobson, North Carolina, but he still remembered what happened to him 20 years earlier while living in Nashville, Tennessee. He and his dog came face to face with something that only seemed partially rooted in our reality. Greg explained that it was a normal day around 1994 when he decided to take his dog for a walk. But shortly after beginning their trip through the woods, Greg started to have the unmistakable sense that he wasn't alone. He could practically feel the eyes of someone else, or something else, watching his every move. And naturally, Greg starts looking around. He doesn't see anybody else around, just him and his dog. The only sound is the wind rushing through the leaves. But that's when something occurs to him. What if the person watching him isn't on the same level as him and his dog? What if they're higher up? What if they're in the trees? So for reasons that Greg doesn't even quite understand himself, he casts his eyes up above, and perched there, half hidden among the branches, is a translucent-like shape just staring back at him. And just like Ned, he claimed it looked just like the cloaked alien from the 1987 movie Predator. The way it distorted the environment around it made it clear enough that whatever it was in the shape of a man. Yet the branches that it crouched on were far too thin to support the weight of a human being. Odd, isn't it? Greg said this.
This thing was as big as a man. I just stood there looking at it, and then I let go of the leash. I yelled, "Hey!" and I took off at a dead run towards this thing, and it started running across the tops of the trees. It ran the length of a football field just in no time. I mean, it was really fast. I don't know how it was running across the tops of the trees, but I know what I saw. After I thought about it, I thought, what in the world are you doing chasing this thing? I stopped, and it stopped about the length of a football field away from where it started. It turned around and looked at me again, and then it took off out through the woods, through the tops of the trees, and I didn't see it again. It scared the hell out of me, I know that. And I never ever told anybody about it because I thought people would think I was crazy as a loon.
Greg finally found the courage to share his account one night on the radio show Coast to Coast AM. But exactly what he encountered is anyone's guess. Was it some sort of tree spirit, or did fiction become reality for a few brief minutes back in 1994 in Nashville? Unfortunately, folks, we'll never know. Our last story comes from an eyewitness who claimed not one, but two encounters with the Glimmer Man over the course of her life, all beginning in her childhood. She swears that she's a well-balanced adult today, complete with a family and a good career. And normally, she wouldn't share her story because people always thought she was having a laugh. But in 2023, she went online under the condition that her story be shared anonymously. So we'll call her Deanna. Deanna said that when she was 5 years old in 1986, that she would often take trips to her grandmother's house in rural Illinois. Oftentimes, she was alone outdoors because her grandmother's house had a giant window facing the forest, so it was easy enough to keep an eye on her. For whatever reason, Deanna was obsessed with digging in the dirt. Sometimes she'd find arrowheads, other times she just dug for the sheer joy of digging. And on the day in question, she had found the perfect spot. Before long, she was completely engrossed in her work. She had no idea how long she'd been at it, but she knows that it must have been a while because she had made a fairly large hole in the ground, and as she's going, she takes a break, leans on her shovel, kind of just letting her gaze drift into the trees. And that was when she first noticed something that caught her eye. You know that shimmery effect that you see on the highways when it gets really hot? Well, that's exactly what she said this patch of trees looked like. But there's two problems with this. The first is this wasn't on a road, it was perched on a branch, and it wasn't hot outside at all. In fact, it was deep into autumn. She remembers the time of year vividly because she was worried about what her mother might say when she came home with her nice jacket covered in dirt and leaves. Plus, there were lots of colored leaves on the ground with it being fall. So Deanna is staring at this shimmery patch above her, and the more she looks, the more she can tell that it isn't just some vague blob up there in the trees. She could easily see the clear definition of a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. And even as a 5-year-old, she realizes this isn't right. There shouldn't be a person in the trees. And that's when, get this, that's when this thing makes a faint clicking sound. In fact, do you guys remember Predator? That's the exact same sound from the movie. And so she runs straight back to her grandmother's house, where she tries her best to just relate what she'd seen. And as a child, the only thing she can say is that she's seen an angel. Now, nothing became of that, but fast forward 7 years later, and she's now 12. The thoughts of that day had fallen far to the back of her mind. In fact, she hadn't given it any thought at all. And that's when someone decided to show her a movie. So she curls up on the couch and she's watching this action movie. Can you guys guess what movie this is? Yeah. And about halfway through, it turns into a science fiction film. She's watching Predator. And the moment that she saw the alien fully cloaked, jumping from tree to tree, clicking as it went, her mouth dropped open. In fact, I won't use her exact wording here, but let's just say that she almost needed a new pair of pants. In an instant, her memory of that day came flooding back, and now she vividly remembered digging in the dirt in Illinois as a child, looking up to the trees and seeing that shimmering form above her, watching and waiting. She could hear that gurgling noise as it filtered through the branches down to where she stood in her hole. This wasn't an angel. Deanna wasn't sure what it was, but she knew that much. Now listen, it's easy to be cynical about this, and to Deanna's credit, she halfway thought that maybe she fabricated the whole thing in her mind. I mean, Deanna asked her dad if the predator was real, but he reassured her that it was just a movie. There was no such thing in real life, alien or otherwise. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that Deanna is being honest. But she did misremember what happened to her as a child. That sort of thing must happen all the time, right? This seems like a good enough excuse until you realize that she saw the exact same thing one night many years later, as a full-grown adult. Let's jump ahead again. It's 2004. She is now 23. She has 3 young children, and she's separated from her husband, taking refuge in a modest apartment building on the edge of a small town. First, a little geography lesson here. Behind the apartment building was a ditch separated from the backyard by a chain link fence. Around 6 or 7 trees sat on the apartment side of the fence, and if you were to follow the ditch from the other side, eventually you'd wind up in a small forested area that connected to a larger forest and out into the country. In other words, a perfect pathway for something to travel from the wilderness into Deanna's own backyard. Now, Deanna was a smoker, but with her 3 kids staying with her, She refused to smoke indoors, so good for her. And tonight, she's out on the back porch of her apartment, enjoying a cigarette and a little peace and quiet while she waits for her laundry to finish. It's one of the few moments she gets nowadays all by herself, and she knows that if she stays out here long enough, all of the worries of her life just might fade away, even if for just a few moments. And so she takes another drag. A light, cool breeze picks up her smoke and carries it into the leaves of the trees along the chain link fence. She can see the children's playground and the overhead light that keeps it illuminated at night. It's not much, but it offers just enough light to make what happens next visible. It's fairly quiet out tonight, but soon she starts noticing something. It's this faint clicking noise. To her credit, she doesn't jump to the conclusion that it has anything to do with what she saw as a child. To the contrary, her first thought is that it might be an animal somewhere out on the lawn. You see, she had seen a groundhog out there a few days earlier, and she wondered if maybe it was putting in an appearance. She scans the lawn, no groundhog. Then, the ditch. But that too seemed lifeless. And so she returns to her cigarette, kind of just shaking herself, thinking like, I'm going crazy, everything's cool, telling herself that it isn't anything to get worried over. But that's when she hears it again. This faint clicking sound, almost like an insect, but it's somewhere out there in the dark. And this time, it shifts its position. And now she can clearly hear it moving, and now it seems to be coming from one of the trees alongside the chain link fence. Now her gaze snaps in the direction of the sound, and there it is, staring at her just as it had 18 years ago. The thing is perched in the tree, watching her from the midst of the branches. A distorted, see-through version of a human being, its edges shimmering like a heat wave above burning hot pavement. This time, the Glimmer man is crouching on one of the branches, one arm wrapped around the trunk of the tree. Through it, she can make out the rest of the leaves and the ditch beyond, but the light from the playground reflects just enough to make it clear that she is not seeing things. Her mind isn't playing tricks on her. This is real. It is there. And in that moment, any doubt that she had really seen it at all in her childhood vanishes. She feels her blood turn cold. She's frozen in place. Her mind is now racing, grasping at the possible explanations for what she could be seeing, because how is science going to explain this? But the only thing that makes any sense is that, for whatever reason, this thing is back. But in the middle of all this inner turmoil, one thought rushes to the top of her mind. Her children are inside, sleeping, alone, vulnerable. She knows that. As a mother, there's just one place she should be right now, and that is by their side. She drops her cigarette, storms indoors, slamming the door shut, locks it. Her hand is shaking the entire time, and she's afraid that she's making a commotion and it's going to wake her kids. But she doesn't care. They need to be safe. And after locking the door, she takes a tour of their rooms, trying to work quickly and quietly enough to not disturb them. And one by one, she checks every window, making sure they're all shut and locked tightly. Only when she's certain that her children are safe does she dare return to the living room. And then after shutting off all the lights and double-checking the doors, she summons the courage to approach the window. She uses 2 fingers to pry apart the blinds and starts scanning the backyard of the apartment complex. At first, she sees nothing. Predictably enough, the thing is camouflaged, but she's staring at the tree where she saw this thing, and it's nowhere. And she's starting to wonder if she's going crazy, or at the least tired and just seeing things. Now, some movement catches her eye, and she sees the neighbor's dog tearing across the lawn, skidding to a stop at the tree and barking ferociously. This dog already had a reputation for being really chill and calm, but not tonight. Tonight, it is fixated at something in the tree and doesn't stop barking until Deanna's neighbor calls it back inside. The dog reluctantly returns home, stopping every few feet to cast a glance back into the branches. And so she waits a little longer, her eyes glued to the tree, her breath caught in her throat, waiting for this thing to appear again. But it never does. The shimmering shape in the tree, if it had ever been there at all, is now gone. And she thinks about that night. She has to push away the memories as she tucks her kids into bed. because in the back of her mind, she knows that there is always the possibility the invisible predator is still out there, moving unseen among the trees. She wonders if it's still watching, waiting for her, but above all else, she wonders exactly what it is and what it wants. And because you guys made it this far into the video, I want you to all comment below, if it bleeds, we can kill it. So that way I know who made it to the end of the video and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy storytelling like this, where we dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, then what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button right now for more content just like this. As always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next video.